Hello there, I'm Anakin Skywalker, and you're tuning into Project Flux on our latest episode. Today, we're joined by Joe Christ, a pioneer in the tech galaxy. Together, we'll delve into how AI is transforming insurance valuations, explore the vast potential of the world's largest 3D printer, and discuss Apple's small language models. Plus, we'll demystify the concept of agnostic AI. Ready your starships, for we're about to embark on a journey through the cutting edge of technology. May the 4th be with you this Saturday.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 5 of the Project Flux podcast. We're back again for another week. You may notice we're down a man today. Unfortunately, Yoshi's not with us. He's stuck somewhere between here and Sweden, coming back from a trip. So you'll have to put up with just me today, I'm afraid, but Yoshi will be back next week. So we've got loads of stories to talk about today, not least the BCIS partnership with Intelligent AI, the world's biggest 3D printer, a little bit around what agnostic AI is. Sounds quite controversial, but we'll talk about that a bit more. Apple's new large language models, or should I say small language models, and the Rabbit R1, and is that going to change the way that we use smartphones? Also, one more shout out for an event this coming Wednesday. I think there's still tickets available for the Project Connect group event in Manchester this coming Wednesday evening. It's just after the ACOST E conference. I think there's still tickets available. So go to our newsletter where you can find a link to the event, and I'm sure there's still opportunity to sign up. I will be there along with a number of my colleagues. I'm venturing up north, so I'll be bringing all my woolly jumpers and ready for a great night out. So that's all the introductions. Now I just want to introduce you to our guest, Joe Christ. Joe, it's a pleasure to have you on. Joe is the CEO and founder of Transform 42. He specializes in elevating digital transformation and operational efficiency. He's got a background in technology, strategic leadership, and operational streamlining. Expert in managing IT systems, implementing agile methodologies, which we'll talk about a bit later. Skills in leading complex projects and driving substantial digital transformation. So he's just the man for this podcast. He's got great professional experience. He's had roles all around, I think, including Lloyd consulting, instrumental in major projects and digital initiatives across government, defence, financial services sectors. And he's helped companies meet their objectives and increase their revenue and profitability. And he's continues to serve as a trusted advisor and strategy expert to clients based in Gilbert, Arizona. So it's nice and early for you, Joe, whereas it's evening time as we're recording this. And as I said, absolute pleasure for you to join us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, James. Glad to be here.
So before we dive in, tell us about yourself and about Transform 42 and what you do.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to. So a little about Transform 42. So the reason we started is we saw a very large failure rate in digital transformations across the world, right? I think it was Bain that came out with the statistic, and a lot of us now think this is a more optimistic number, that digital transformations fail 70% of the time.
Wow.
Right. So imagine companies investing millions, if not billions of dollars into these transformations to help them not only survive the future, but to thrive in the digital age, right? An age that all companies are experiencing now, where there is more data and technology to know what to actually do with, where customers are now more informed and can also scrutinize between different vendors. So we do this through the alignment of people, process, and tooling to help the digital business strategy, right? I spent a lot of time the past 7 years actually studying why these transformations fail, right? It could be everything due to leadership not being engaged appropriately. And this is not by any sort of bias or anything nefarious. It's about the culture that companies have.
Yeah.
Existing in the digital age is not just about having the best new AI tool. It's about having the right culture, the right process, and scalable, and having the right tools that actually fit to these processes that can scale with the organization. When all this is interconnected, companies thrive and they scale. So we help companies reach that point through advisory work and also implementing these actual transformations themselves.
Yeah, and it's that stat you mentioned, that's incredible, and but I believe it. It's a very, very complex thing, digital transformation, and it means different things to different people. Could you share how your leadership your philosophy has evolved through like various digital transformations and the way that the rate of change is happening? I'm assuming every digital transformation is slightly different, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's been an interesting journey along the way. When I first started, I had the same idea as most other people. When I first started with Lloyd, and I learned a lot there. But a lot of people see digital transformation as adopting purely just tools, right? They assume digital transformation is also IT transformation, right? Where it's just also why a lot of failures occur. People will essentially buy the latest gadget or the latest tool out there because it's best in class and assume it's going to solve their problems. But really what it does is when you buy these types of tools to enhance your company, if your process isn't good and your culture does not align with the customer needs, all the technology will do is make a process that's not working not work faster.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people exactly. They think, well, I buy a piece of tech, job done. But you mentioned the word culture there, and we've talked about it a few times already. We're only on episode 5, and I think it's come up every time. I mean, that's such an important part to digital transformation, the cultural change, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and not just for the company, but for the customers as well. I mean, if you look at things like Apple or Amazon, even they have their own customer culture, right?
Yeah.
If with iPhones, for example, having the blue text that comes up, I know now I'm talking to an iPhone user, which now means I can also FaceTime with them, and I have other capabilities. So I can actually interact with them. So it now enhances my connection, right? It's network effects. But by actually having that culture and really facilitating growth through that, you maximize not just the products and revenue, but allows culture to grow faster while also being able to support the actual technological growth, right? Because you're getting feedback.
Yeah, and it's organic, isn't it? When it happens like that, it's not a push strategy. It's it's just happening. And like you mentioned around the blue text on an iPhone, right? That changes your behavior straight away. You realize, wow, this person's on this ecosystem, therefore I can do things with them that I wouldn't be able to do with another user, right? And that's not necessarily to do with tech. The tech's allowed a behavior pattern to emerge that changes, brings down barriers. I've noticed it myself when I use kind of those technologies.
Exactly, and it does create community as well. I mean, the same. Yeah. So once you actually have this, you have these processes that will also support. It's like, okay, now I can actually have a video call with them. Now I can send them imagery. Now I can have this. I know who I'm talking to. I know what type of technology and what that person on the other end can do. It creates that information or creates that knowledge that says, hey, this person's like me. I can do more.
Exactly. So that's one of the key lessons. What other key lessons have you learned about sort of driving change through these digital transformations that you've done?
A big challenge I've dealt with it. So I've been doing this for about 7 years now. Everywhere with clients I had with Lloyd to Sageti to even working with Lockheed Martin for a little bit. A big challenge a lot of companies face when it comes to digital transformation is process design. What happens with companies as they begin to grow, they try to stretch their processes out with their growth, right? And by doing this, the process is really originally designed to only handle a throughput of so much work. Now, as that work increases, what I find organizations typically doing is building workarounds.
Yeah. Which always come unstuck, right?
Exactly. Right. So you have these workarounds that may have worked at a time period, but they're not sustainable. So the big challenge too is when you have these workarounds, they're not really documented. And a lot of organizations do have this challenge because they are growing so fast. Documentation is not always on the forefront of their mind, right? It's about revenue generation and staying compliant and things like that. So when it comes to mapping out processes, they don't do this. And here's where it gets them in trouble during a digital transformation. It's you need to actually have your technology aligned to the process. Technology is not just something you plug into and it works. It's something that is designed to augment an existing process. When you don't have the process clearly defined, you limit the impact of technology. So even if a digital transformation is somewhat successful, you still limit the impact and the value you actually do gain from it because the process is not actually designed based on what the company needs to help their customer.
Yeah, you know you're going wrong when you're changing the process to fit the technology, right? It's got to be the other way around. And you
Exactly.
mentioned that word again. There's a few key words, that augmentation role. It is meant to be augmenting what we're doing, whether it's IT transformation, whether it's a construction job. It's meant to help. I think a lot of the time you can go with your gut instinct, can't you? If you feel when something's not working because it feels like a struggle, and a
Hmm.
digital transformation should be helping, not feeling like a struggle.
Exactly. And I think a lot of it does come from digital literacy,
Mm,
right?
mm.
A lot of people will adopt technologies because look at GPT, for example,
Yeah,
right? It's a very powerful tool. It's very good for general information, but a lot of people will look at AI and see something that is narrow AI and treat it like general AI. They
yeah.
assume that, oh, this is all in the same bucket or the same
Mm,
pool. And
mm,
it's just like, okay, it will just do whatever I tell it to do. And it can't, right? So people make these assumptions that technology will do things, but they also don't
mm,
understand the limitations. But when you understand the limitations, then you can actually narrow the focus on like, hey, we can use it for this. But
mm,
it's
mm.
not having that understanding, right? Not having that digital literacy does lead to a lot of problems. And I've dealt with that a lot too with clients, especially implementing new technologies, right? And replacing
Yeah,
the old legacy system. Now, a big challenge we have with that, it's the training is so minimal, right? It'll be, hey, here's a 1 day class on how to use this, or a 2 day class on how to use this brand new tool that's going to replace it.
it's
And
not
what
enough.
ultimately happens is people get frustrated because they
Mm,
don't understand how to use this tool for their job. And
yeah, I've
because of that,
seen
a
that.
lot of people try to go back to the old system, right? They're like, oh, I
Mm,
don't like this new thing. I don't like this new thing. And they're going to use the old system for as long as they can until it's taken off
yeah,
of the
it's
architecture.
amazing the lengths people will go to cling on to an old system. I don't know if you've seen that as well, Joe, but I've seen some incredible things, almost getting to the point of sabotage, just because people hate change. They really
Mhm.
do.
Well, people go to where they're comfortable. If a new tool was brought in or a new system was brought in and it did actually help people and made their lives easier, then it'd be much easier to adopt, especially if you
Yeah,
taught them how to do it, right? You create that digital literacy. You have things actually aligned to the processes. You have the tool designed to actually fit their needs, right? And
yeah,
the thing too, when it comes to implementing any sort of technology or new process or anything like digital transformation like that, it's not only understanding your customers' needs, but understanding your employees' needs.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and and you can treat them you should treat them like a customer as well, right? Your employees are,
Exactly.
when it comes to digital transformation, they're just as important, because if they don't adopt it, then the whole thing fails. So in
Exactly.
terms of like new technology and sort of trends, we can see where things are going with these large language models and other AI. What do you see the future of digital transformation in, say, the next 5 years? Is it going to change because of these technologies, or is it just, kind of the more of the same, just with a different kind of tool set?
So what I've seen, and I really can't speak for the UK, but what I've seen in the US is a lot of companies are adopting technologies very rapidly, which is good and bad, right? It's good because now they're experimenting, but it's bad because now they're buying things they don't necessarily understand.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I do use a lot of AI tools for myself, right?
Hmm.
I love them. They do help me scale very effectively, but I do also have a process designed, and I will redefine the process if it doesn't actually work. So I do follow my own rules. But what I do see with a lot of companies, it's there becomes such a heavy reliance on
Mm,
using these tools and using the digital environment to the point where they're skipping steps.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what I see happening, right? It's a good example is like content creation, right? So you have so much content being pushed out into the world, right? From these digital tools, that AI is actually just regurgitating things it's already said,
absolutely. Yeah, we've all seen
right?
that, I think.
But yeah, so you have that, and it's making it harder for, and some of these tools are also so expensive that it's also harder for smaller business to compete. But at the
Yeah,
same token, there are other tools out there because there's proliferation. There's a massive expansion of AI
yeah.
tools coming out now. So some are more obtainable, but because there is now such a huge market need and not a lot of digital literacy and knowledge on these AI tools, you see a lot of smaller businesses who just don't have the know-how buying into them and trying to use them to leverage
And
and
there's a
then
little
try
bit
to
of
grow them.
FOMO, isn't there, or people just trying to keep up, and they're just buying things, not really thinking about it. They don't have a strategy. They just feel like, well, I need to get on the bandwagon, right?
Yeah. And that's what I think about it. It's, hey, I need to keep creating content, right? People think about like SEO, for example,
Mhm.
right? It's there. I mean, there's a lot of really great SEO tools out there. I mean, not even 5 years ago, most SEO tool or most SEO was, you have a vendor or somebody you hire to go do SEO for you, but now you have SEO tools that automate themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
They'll every week they can improve and make adjustments, right? By analyzing your site and also analyzing the needs.
Mm.
So which is wonderful, but what I think it's actually going to do, it's you essentially enter into an AI arms race
Mm.
where you have all these technologies that are now competing and all these companies are essentially arming themselves with whatever tools they can. But what happens as a result, it's nobody becomes competitive because everybody becomes competitive.
Yeah, everyone's at the same level, is it? And it's quite hard to shine through. You were talking about regurgitated content. So everyone's regurgitating the same content. It's quite hard for the good stuff to really come through. The original thought, the original kind of thought leadership, where it's buried somewhere between a load of regurgitated stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And kind of the way I see getting through that really to reach your customers is actually to focus more on relationship building.
Yeah,
Right? Actually focus more on outreach, which you can use AI to augment that. However, it's actually having those long relationships, providing value early on, even though if maybe it's very low cost or free value to your customers, whether that's through information or whatever services, by actually bringing them in that way, as opposed to just saying, hey, here's our product, you should buy it, because everybody's doing that, right? Everybody is maximizing their SEO. Everybody is trying to use AI in one way or another to, or not just AI, but blockchain, IoT, even VR and AR, right, to help augment their services and add value to it. But what they're really not doing is finding ways to really connect with their customers, and that's one of the things you have to do too. When you become a digitally transformed company, is be customer centric. The days of being product centric in a highly reactive world are over.
Those days are long gone now. You're absolutely right. If we all assume we're at the same level, at least it's within everyone's reach through a relatively modest subscription. Now you have to shine through those relationships. But there's so much good stuff around technology. The very fact that we're having this conversation now, we're using technology that we wouldn't have been able to do only a few years ago. So, but it's exactly, you say, we're using it to build a relationship, which, we wouldn't have been able to do before. So there's lots of good use cases and there's lots of really, really bad use cases. So it's a fascinating world, Joe. And, it sounds like you've got your work cut out, and I'm sure it's keeping you nice and busy. But I'd like to go on some of the main stories now, because there's quite a lot to cover today, if that's okay. The first one I wanted to look at was a story about BCIS. So the BCIS is the Building Cost Information Service in the UK. They do a lot of sort of cost predictions, indices, what have you. They used to be owned by the RICS, I believe, which is the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. But they announced this key partnership with AI Limited, Intelligent AI Limited, an AI company, all around what they're saying is the underinsurance issue. And it really got me thinking, because they put this stat out that 80% of properties are underinsured by up to 50%. That's their stat. And the BCIS Chief Markets Officer says this game-changing collaboration brings together two industry pioneers, each with rich history of expertise and innovation, to provide a solution to underinsurance. So, they obviously think this is a big issue. And I guess, the first question is, do you think there's an issue with underinsurance on properties?
So I just recently found out that my own property was underinsured. So I was talking to an agent a couple of days ago, and he was saying that I was paying too much and I was underinsured. And actually, it turned out I was paying about $2,500 more than I actually had to, and I
That's
was only
never a good combination.
right. And yeah, I was only insured for about half the house.
Oh my
which
goodness.
is pretty alarming, right? You imagine if there's a disaster or fire or anything like that, and I would only have enough to get half my house set up, which is mind blowing to me, right?
And the world's a risky place right now, isn't it? There's so many risks up.
No, it absolutely is, and that's the thing too. It's like when you're underinsured, if something happens, that could be detrimental to the organization, to your business, to anything, to your life, to your employees' lives. And when you can't get back on track, right? Because your insurance only gets you to a certain point. What do you do? one, you lose your competitive advantage, but two, it's like there's even a harder choice you're going to have to make. It's how do we control costs, because we can't actually run the business fully, right? I mean, whether it's an office building or a manufacturing plant or anything like that, it's
Yeah.
incredibly detrimental. So actually
And
having it,
if you're underinsured, in the end, everyone's premiums ends up going up. And I think this is what this BCIS collaboration is trying to do: make sure everyone's paying the right amount, so that no one's picking up the bill for people who have been underinsured at some point. So I can definitely see the need for it. And I think what they're really looking at the kind of commercial property market, and the scope for that is absolutely huge. I do a lot of my work in London, where you can imagine there's a lot of commercial property. Sure, the same for you. So I can absolutely see the need for it. But I guess the important thing, it's only going to be as good as the data, right? So how important do you think the data is to make sure these models are accurate?
that is the and no pun intended, that is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So when it comes to any sort of database, your data is the output is only as good as your input. If your data is not relevant and is not timely, then the decisions you're making are you're essentially working with incomplete data, right? And that is a challenge a lot of organizations face. Both in the is what we're looking at still good, and by actually having data that says, hey, we're underinsured, or here's the property rate, or here's how much these properties actually cost. And even the thing people don't think about, it's when it comes to rebuilding things, it's material costs, it's inflation, right? I mean, even in Arizona alone, the value of properties has been enormous, and building new houses has become so costly, most people can't actually even afford it.
Yeah. And I guess the other problem is you're looking at past data. And I think what they say here in one of the quotes in this article is that there's been so much inflation, construction inflation, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same around the world, because of the impact of the wars, the impact of COVID, that actually you can't always use past data to represent what a rebuild cost is going to be, because things have changed so much. So I think I haven't seen it. It's not going to be actually launched until, it says, summer 2024. But I think the algorithm takes into account these kind of really up-to-date events that happen, like things like wars and things like pandemics.
Right. And the trick with data, though, right, and even forecasting, right, the further out your forecast goes, the harder it is to actually be correct. Forecasts typically work better in shorter term, because the world,
Of course.
though the world does have a lot of very random events occurring through it, they don't happen as quickly and grouped together. They are very sparsed out. So if you're only looking 3 months out, the chances of you being correct are a lot higher than looking 18 months out. But it still does give you a direction of which way it's going, which is helpful. But obviously, you will have ups and downs along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose that can lead to the other way, where you over-insure just to be on the safe side. And none of these firms, if you're unsure, want to be over-insuring either, because that increases your premium. So it's a very, very delicate balance. And, you've got to, this is where I think you always need a human in the loop, at least for the moment, because the algorithm on its own can obviously give you the wrong end of the stick, because it's looking at past data and assuming that past data is going to be guiding you in the right direction. And I think the algorithm plus a human is an incredibly powerful combination.
I agree. And I think that's something that a lot of organizations are overlooking at the moment. Is they become so heavily reliant on the tool itself that they don't realize it could be wrong, right? The data is the output is only as good as the input, and also the model. If there are flaws in it, you need a human's eyes and human's mind to actually validate it. Say, hey, this doesn't make sense, or hey, it does make sense, we can move forward. By removing people out of the loop and having the entire thing be automated, or the entire process automated by AI, you're going to hurt people, and you're going to hurt organizations. Dangerous. It's very dangerous, right? And to me, it feels unethical too, where you say, hey, we don't need people, because it's like this tool's figuring it all out. It's like, no, the tool is giving you an output. A person needs to interpret that output, interpret the data, and understand where the actual limitations of these tools are. So I do think it's a step in the right direction, creating visibility, because there's a lot of data to go through, more than any one person can do. But actually, by having an output, a person who actually has background in this space can say, hey, that does make sense. It's like, okay,
exactly. I think it's that combination.
Right. So yeah, I know a lot of people
So,
have this fear of. Sorry, go ahead.
now, as much of an advocate of AI as I am, which is why I do this podcast and the newsletter, and some people kind of sometimes misunderstand me. They're like, I'm never saying that you shouldn't have a human in the loop, but certainly not now. I think it's an aid for humans, and it's going to enable us to do our job better. If you can have an algorithm guide you in the right direction, but I think the human still has to have an override on all kind of decisions at the moment. The minute that we start handing off decision making to algorithms, we're in dangerous territory.
Yes, and that's the thing too. I was saying before, when it comes to technology should always augment a process.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that
People
word again, augment.
augment, and that's what I think a lot of people miss when it comes to using AI or any sort of tool. It's technology should augment a process. It should
Absolutely.
empower people to make the best decisions possible. You know, by
Cool.
having by leveraging these tools and allowing it to make decisions on its own. And there's a lot of examples of this throughout the world where people are just so heavily reliant on AI making decisions for them. What they don't realize is they actually hurt their customer base.
Yeah, because they lose trust. So it's and we're at the beginning of that. Certainly in the construction industry, I think we're at the beginning of that journey, and we've just got to make sure we guard it very, very carefully. Anyway, I'm sure we could talk about that article for ages. Let's move on to another big story that's come out this week. It's actually from your side of the pond, but it was on a BBC article. It was around the world's biggest 3D printer at the University of Maine, and it was. I had to read this a few times, but we're getting to the point where these 3D printers can print objects up to 96 feet long. Apparently, that's roughly the length of a blue whale. So, we're going from this situation where we're using 3D printer to print small components to actually being able to print, if not whole properties, very, very big components within, a building or an infrastructure project. So how significant do you think the scale of this 3D printer by the University of Maine is? Is this a sign of the future, do you think, Joe?
Ooh, I really do love this article. And I was thinking about this from a lot of different angles, right?
Hmm.
And first and foremost, just, I like imagine the scale of this thing. Like it's almost the size of a blue whale. That is a massive,
It's mad, isn't it?
massive tool. And what's crazy about it too is it's just it can produce things. And I've used 3D printers in the past, and I made some pretty cool things, but they're all very small. Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to the future, there's something I do think about. It's how much does it cost to actually build one of these?
Yeah, it's
Right?
got to be worth your while, hasn't it? The
Yes.
economies of scale have to be such that you're going to use this quite a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't pay as much for shipping costs, but essentially, you have a factory in a box now.
Yeah.
Where it can produce items that are the size of a house. But one of the, I guess, challenges when it comes to this, it's materials, right? When you're building a house, there are materials that need to be hard on others, right? The material that actually you use for 3D printers, the polymers, do not handle heat very well. Right? Obviously, it takes heat to make them and form things. So I don't know how comfortable I would be to have a 3D printed water heater.
Yeah, it's
Right.
gonna cause a lot of heat, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And there's just things out there that like they're better if they're metals, things that can't be 3D printed. Like even like on a garage, the spring, like it requires so much strength to keep those intact
Yeah.
and keep them from breaking. So like there are certain things that obviously if you're making cabinets, even some furniture, I think it's a phenomenal idea, and I think it will help scale the
See, that's
production.
where I think it's going to be useful. I think it's going to be used more in restoration projects where you need to kind of recreate maybe a historical kind of building, some skirting or some kind of door feature where, you can't buy it off the shelf. I agree with you entirely that just printing houses or printing large components of houses, what's the point if you can just go and buy it? But where you need to recreate something, I can see it being quite useful.
Oh, absolutely. And you could also mass produce. I mean, though it is the
Yeah.
size, it's big enough to make a house. You can, like I said before, it's a factory in a box.
Yeah.
You can produce a large scale, a large quantity of cabinets, of drawers, of anything really, and you can do it very quickly because now you have this machine that is now churning them out. And if you were
Mm.
actually disperse this through an entire country, you would essentially replace a lot of factories. But here's the real challenge here, right? So the concept of creative destruction. So what
Mm.
will this do to manufacturing jobs?
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
There is going to be a cost to this now. It's where it's like, okay, now we can essentially automate this entire process using this tool. Right? We're going to have a few guys doing QA to make sure everything turned out right and also minimize defects. But whoever it's going to replace, they're now have to be retrained and find a new job somewhere else. And if the economy doesn't
Yeah,
support
there's a
that, that's
human
going to,
cost to it for sure.
yeah, right. Now that's
And,
something
and
we
you
also
know,
need to be aware of.
absolutely, and with all these techs, so if you take the 3D printing alongside the kind of the robots that are being produced, those humanoid robots, the Tesla robots and the Boston Dynamic robots, you can definitely see a situation where that kind of traditional labor force on site is going to be diminished, and those people will have to be retrained. But this is where I think there's technology, because someone still needs to control. Like you said, there's QA to be done. There's still other jobs will emerge from that. So I still try and be optimistic with this and see it as an opportunity to get people away from that. Let's face it, being on a construction site is risky. There's this where a lot of the health and safety incidents happen. If we can take people away from that, retrain them to provide, jobs in a more controlled condition, whether it's a 3D printer, whether it's a factory for modern methods of construction, or whether it's utilizing drones or robots, then surely that's a good thing.
Yes. Well, that's the thing too. When it comes to any sort of innovation, there's always a benefit and there's always a cost. And this isn't just with
Yeah,
AI or 3D printing. This is also came from the automobile. This came through history.
yeah, of course.
All technology throughout human history has caused shifts, right? So by
Mm,
creating something, yes, you will have to retrain a workforce, and it will be painful for a little bit. Do I think people can be retrained? Yes, if they want to, absolutely. But they also have to want to. So
yeah.
it also depends on the need of the company, right? This also offers a more
Mm,
cost-effective solution to help companies scale. If it's a manufacturing company, they can build faster, right? Which means they can distribute faster,
yeah,
right? Their
yeah.
products are actually out there, which is phenomenal, right? So it will also change a lot of industries as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, but
Yeah,
also
I
just
find it fascinating.
how the industries actually respond to this change, because once one person has one, once any company has this, right, and they start producing and other companies see the benefit, everybody's going to start investing
Yeah.
and trying to
Well, it
have
goes
their
back
own.
to what we were talking about before with the competitive advantage. It's only a
Mhm.
competitive advantage while you're the only one to have it. As soon as your competitors see it, they'll want one too. And then, whether it's a robot, whether that's modern methods of construction. So,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. It's just another kind of part of this equation, isn't it? When we talk about AI, but there's so much more to it when we look at things like 3D printers, robots, IoT, quantum computing, blockchain. All these things together are just fascinating. Moving on to another article, might be the last one we've got time for. There was a fascinating LinkedIn piece by I think it was Bernard Marr, talking about something called agnostic AI, which I straight away grabbed my attention, and I read into it, and it was quite an interesting piece. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's around this concept of agnostic AI avoiding that vendor lock-in and this real danger that people are rushing to kind of get in on the AI arms race that you described earlier, Joe. And that by doing so, you're locking yourself into some of these vendors that you can then you're kind of stuck with, and your whole ecosystem is built around that. That could be OpenAI, it could be Google, whatever one. But actually, there's a huge argument, and this article makes this very, very compelling case for being agnostic to your AI and making sure you retain that flexibility. What do you think about this article? Have you had the chance to have a look at it
Oh
at all?
yes, yes. I feel very strongly that any organization, whether they be commercial, government, and anything, should always be agnostic with any technology they're using, right? Especially with AI.
Yeah.
So I'm sure as everyone has seen, there there is one, or there's always a new tool out there. There's always a new AI tool for different, for whether it be marketing, operations, project management, you name it. Everybody is creating it because it's such a big thing now, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is trying to get into the space. But when you do that, it becomes very easy to get sucked into the noise, where it's just, oh, hey, we are, and my least favorite term, we are best in class. We do
Mm.
this, we do that. But really, when you become so focused on a certain vendor, or a certain product, what's happening is you're giving yourself blinders, right?
Yeah.
People will buy something because it sounds good, right? Not because it fits their process, not because it fits their culture.
Or that
It's
FOMO,
because,
just to keep it,
yeah,
just to fit,
exactly.
they feel like they're keeping up.
Yeah. And they want to. And there's a very logical reason why people feel that way. It's because it's like, hey, I need to be competitive, or I need to
Yeah.
use this to make my life easier. And without actually knowing, they'll just buy into it. And also because sometimes some of these solutions are very, very expensive, people
Mm.
will buy long-term contracts, right? To try
Mm.
to minimize the cost. Even if it's a few $1,000s a year, that's still something, especially for a new company. But what the challenging part now is when you're locked into this technology that you continuously pay for, you have a contract. As your company grows, that technology might not be the right product for you.
Yeah.
So now
Yeah.
what's going to
Absolutely.
happen is you have this very expensive tool that you can't use, or if you can use it, but it's keeping you from growing to where you need to go.
Yeah.
And by
Or
doing that,
growing. I mean, I also feel that if you get sucked into or tied into a vendor, it can stifle creativity as well, because
Mhm.
you know the agnostic AI enables you to try things out with different suppliers, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But it not only allows you to try different things out, but you can see like, hey, these features are actually better. This fits our needs, right? And
Yeah,
as our
yeah,
needs change, and the way the world is and the way business is, customers' needs change, and as the customers' needs change, so does the companies. So does
yeah,
if you run a business, so does your needs with it, right? Because you have to be able to adjust, right? That's the whole idea of agility, right? Having business agility is the ability to pivot and make changes when the market demands it. If you're stuck
yeah.
with whatever architecture you have and it's 5 years until you can change it, it may be too late for you to change in the future, right? Because
Yeah,
everybody
and
else who
I've
actually stays
seen it.
in,
I'm sure you've got some examples as well. But I've certainly seen people, with the scars to prove that. They're stuck, and either they've got to end up paying two licenses, which is inefficient, because they're stuck with a certain provider, or they stick with them and they just wait it out. But in this day and age, that can be extremely damaging. You take the whole kind of chat GPT revolution that's happened over the last sort of 18 months or so. A lot of people wouldn't have seen that coming necessarily, and if they were tied into something else, it would have been very, very difficult for them to make that switch.
absolutely. Yeah, and the ability to
Yeah,
pivot, especially in today's day and age, it's so critical, right? Because as consumers and as people who run businesses, we have to make decisions with incomplete information. The more we know,
yeah,
the better choices we can make. But we will never make a decision knowing everything. We only make decisions knowing the best we can at the time we have it.
absolutely. Yeah. And just with that, I think that's the key word: flexibility. Being very careful, doing your due diligence. Don't get locked into something. And do read this article, this agnostic AI article. I'll put it in the show notes. It's a great kind of instruction to the whole concept. We got time for one more story to discuss, and I think there's an interesting one that's come out from Apple. I always like an Apple story on this podcast, but they're talking about they're finally entering the kind of a large language model revolution. Although I think what they've got is called small language model, because what they're trying to do is get these models to work on very, very small devices like your iPhone, using flash memory to run these LLMs, or small language models as they'll come to be known. And I think they're also looking at open sourcing a lot of these models, which is very unusual for Apple, which is notoriously very kind of closed-walled and keeps things to themselves. So what did you make of this article, Joe?
I had a lot of different feelings as I read through the article. At first, I didn't actually see that they were putting it on flash memory, and the first thing I
Yeah,
thought of was like, "There's no way that's going to last." But I do like the solution of using flash memory, right? Because it does increase, capacity. It's a lot less power consumption. It
yeah,
also allows them to, retain and access larger data sets much faster.
yeah, yeah,
But the thing I thought was most interesting too is much like Apple and how they exist in an ecosystem, right? Whether you have your watches or your phone or any other Apple product out there, it all connects,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So by using these small language models, you now have it exists now in an ecosystem through an organization. So if your business is actually running Apple products, assuming this is how they're going to do this, if your business is running Apple products and they actually are using these LLMs, you can use it across your entire organization.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that's
That will
exactly
help
what
you
they're banking on, isn't
scale
it?
very
Yeah,
fast if you were to do this. And I think it's a very powerful move. And I think
yeah,
once they actually do this, it's going to create a lot of competition in that space because you have the other vendors out there, other computer companies in big tech who are going to see this and they're going to try to respond.
yeah.
Right. I mean, a lot of them already came, everybody's come out with their own LLMs, but by being able to scale it across a bunch of networked items or networked,
Mm.
assets, whether it be your computer, your iPhone, your Apple Watch, or really anything from there, and have it linked together, that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it so interesting. Like last week, we talked about the Meta's version, the Llama 3, and their take on it is to make it totally open source. And then you've got the Open AI, which is pushing it hard using Copilot into the Microsoft ecosystem. And now you've got Apple's take on it, which is, we're going to make it like exactly as you say, we're going to build it into the ecosystem. So we're bringing down the barriers to usage so that it just works across your kind of Apple ecosystem. And the different kind of way that these companies are approaching it is so interesting. And the next few years are going to be, it's going to be, I won't want to be a betting man on which one's going to come out on top, put it that way, because I think it's really up for grabs. Having said that, I always think, and I said it in the last podcast, that Apple kind of sit back and they wait and they watch what everyone's doing. And then they kind of use all that research, and usually their strike rate's pretty high, isn't it? They usually release something and they seem to hit the spot. They reduce those barriers to entry, and they do that thing where they build it into the ecosystem, like you say. So I certainly would not bet against Apple being one of the leaders.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that's the important thing to note too. It's their approach to it, right? A lot of
Yeah,
companies, it's the whole idea like the first mover advantage. Well, there's
yeah,
plenty of companies who had the first mover advantage and they developed technology, but they failed a lot along the way, right?
yeah, a lot.
What the real trick is, if you want to grow a company, is to learn from someone else's mistakes, build a better system, and then use your infrastructure to scale it. Right? That's like
Yeah,
if you look at another example, like not quite like Apple, but if you look at Facebook,
mm,
right? Facebook wasn't the first social media network, but they learned a lot from MySpace,
yeah,
a whole lot, and they improved upon it, and then they scaled. Right? Apple has the ability to do that. They have their own culture. They have a network of people. I know who iPhone users are. I know who has Apple Watches. I can see all of it because it's all
mm,
communicated to me, right? So
yeah,
by having everything actually be able to interconnect it, even when you have one device, your apps can copy to another. And I think I
yeah,
saw in the article too is about using LLMs in the apps,
yeah.
right?
I
So
think
like
what they'll do is they'll take down the barriers so you won't even know you're using LLMs. They've got this habit and this ability to just make their products feel just seamless. So the average person won't realize they're using AI or large language models at all. It will just be part of their workflow and part of their normal routine.
right, yeah, and as it should be, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it becomes frictionless, right?
yeah,
Where you're
yeah,
using something, you don't even realize you're using it, but it adds value to you, right? But it's just running in the background, and that's really good digital transformation right there. When you actually do have
yeah,
this seamless process, where it's just like you press a button or you say a command, and everything just happens for you,
yeah.
right? And I think
Funny
that's
enough,
going to
we were going to go on to a story about the rabbit one, which unfortunately we haven't got time for, but you can read all about it in the newsletter, which it does exactly that. It takes away the kind of friction of even having a keyboard. You could just literally talk to this AI powered device. We might cover that on the next podcast, but we are going to have to close there because we've all got things to get on with. But it's been absolutely fascinating discussion, Joe, and we could carry on talking all evening, I'm sure. But before we sort of close, have you got any parting words or thoughts you'd like to tell the listeners?
I'm thinking about this throughout our conversation. I think the biggest thing that people should take away when it comes to AI and digital transformation is to be deliberate about it, right? Don't buy tools because they're popular. Don't buy tools
Yeah,
because people tell you they're best in class. If you're gonna implement any sort of technology, you have to think of it in terms of people, process, and technology, right? In
yeah,
that order, right? You create digital literacy, understand what you're getting yourselves into, and understand the process that it's going to fit into, right? And then you might actually discover that, hey, I don't need to spend all this money. I can just do this.
Yeah.
Right. Having a better informed world when it comes to this technology, as fast as it's moving, is only going to help people. The worst thing you can do is, jump into this just because everybody else is doing it. Jump into it because it's right for you.
Yeah. And I know it feels like that. It feels like, oh, I've got to get on with it. Everyone's talking about AI. It's important. But, we're still early in this process. And, a wrong decision now could really set you back a long way. So don't feel like, I think those are very wise words, parting words, Joe. Don't feel like you've got to rush into anything. Do your research. The next big thing's only around the corner anyway. So it's not like you're going to miss out hugely. And just take your time. We are still at the early stage. But yeah, really, really wise words. Thank you so much, Joe. So it's been great having you on. I hope you'll join us again in the future and see where things have gone in the next few months. And for all the listeners, please don't forget to hit the follow button and the subscribe button. And if you can, please leave a review, because it really, talking about algorithms and everything, it really helps the algorithm to push this podcast out there so everyone can get the benefit of these great conversations I'm privileged to have with people. And also don't forget about the Project Flux newsletter every Monday morning to your inbox. Subscribe to the link in the show notes. But that about wraps it up for this week. Thank you again, Joe, and we will see you again next week with another fun-packed episode. See you all later. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much, James. Glad to be here.